Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 486, I Was the Slightest in the House. Now, of course, the word slightest will be the very first thing that we will notice in this poem. In many ways, we're back to poem 271 and our discussion of Emily's white dress. We have one garment of Emily's remaining, and when you look at it, many people who have pointed out that Emily had to be somewhere between 5'1" to 5'4". She was physically extremely small. She was a small woman, and so in regards to slightest, obviously we're going to play that game. We are in many ways back to poem 154. Except to heaven, she is not. Except for angels, lone. Except to some wide wandering bee, a flower superfluous blown. Except for winds provincial, except by butterflies, unnoticed as a single dew that on the acre lies. The smallest housewife in the grass, yet take her from the lawn, and somebody has lost the face that made existence home. Now, at the point she writes this poem, she is 31 years old. Many are going to argue this is one of the most important biography poems, autobiography poems, of Emily, and her construction of poetry itself. There is, however, a lot of debate about this poem in regards to what she says about herself. The great scholar Sewell has pointed out that Emily lived aloud with the boisterous Austin, her brother, and the pert Vinnie, her sister, and was known as a talker and a tease among her young friends. In that regards, then, we'll have some debate about this poem and what Emily confides about herself as poet. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily. If you have, and I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as our preceding 485 poems, we just finished with 485, to make one's own toilet, you know that Emily has already been discussing the ways in which her poetry and the production of her poetry is challenging. Okay? Emily has, as we've commented already, will use the word small in 77 of her poems. Here, of course, it'll be slightest. Little in 172 of her poems, emphasizing the fragility and the light. Now, some have called this poem traumatic. So I want to set you up for the reading at that point. As we said, Emily was often referred to several times in her life as a talker, a great communicator. Again, our series is called Chats with Emily. In many ways, this is a poem about Emily's carving out her own space, maybe an idyllic space for her. And we cannot help but think about Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own as we play this game. The great scholar Judith Farr has said it this way. She says, quote, in this poem, an expression of, quote, the guarded and secretive life of a persona embarrassed by the noise and triviality of shared community. One who therefore depicts herself living most enjoyably and creatively at night or just before sunrise. There is some reason to believe that Emily would rise quite early, some have said as early as 3 a.m., to write her poetry in her bedroom before she then went through a full day of the activities of her life. Let's just turn now to the poem and enjoy the poem. I was the slightest in the house. I took the smallest room. At night, my little lamp and book and one geranium. So stationed, I could catch the mint that never ceased to fall. And just my basket, let me think, I'm sure that was all. I never spoke unless addressed, and then 'twas brief and low. I could not bear to live aloud. The racket shamed me so. And if it had not been so far, and anyone I knew were going, I had often thought, how noteless. I could die. Now, of course, we're reminded already that Emily's "This is my letter to the world," she says, "judge tenderly of me." And here we have a poet, an amazing poet, telling us, looking back on her life, what her experience was like in the house where she grew up. Of course, today you can still visit this house, and I very much recommend that you do so at Amherst. She says, I was the slightest in the house, taking us back to poem 283 and poem 400. You'll remember from poem 400, least figure on the road, right? The slightest in the house doesn't necessarily mean physically the slightest, although she was probably, but rather what? The slightest in the house, the most unnoticed, if you will. Emily again emphasizing that there's nothing to her. She's slight. She says, I took, notice the point here is that she chose this, right? Now the slightest could mean the least important as well. I'm going to leave that one to you to decide. I took the smallest room. Some have argued possibly shared with her sister Vinnie, possibly even her brother Austin at times. At night, notice now, we got a lamp, we got maybe emphasizing our symbolically lighter vision. We have a book, maybe we're talking here other poets, and we've commented on Emily's reading, right? And one geranium. Some have commented that maybe this is inspirational of, her nature, right? The geranium. In other words, overrelated to growing. What's her point here? Well, I lived in a room. I didn't have much. We immediately have to think of her contemporary Henry David Thoreau, who of course lived in a hut that he constructed by that little pond Walden, right? She'll then pause in the second. It's almost as if she's saying this all out loud. Like, I think that's all I had, so stationed. In other words, that was how I accoutred myself, how I took care of myself. So stationed, I could catch the mint. Now, many have commented on the fact that this is a wonderful choice because not only is this what you smell, but mint can also mean money, right? As in, I caught, maybe we would say, the blessings from the God, inspiration. So she's playing in that whole line of thinking as well for the Greeks, right? So stationed, I could catch the mint that never ceased to fall. I can't read a line like this and not think about Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, passage 48. I find letters from God dropped in the street and I leave them wherever I find them because I know many more will follow. Never ceased to fall. This idea of the brilliant ideas that she has, that she produces in her poetry. 1,775 poems in the Johnson edition. And many, if not all of them, were constructed in this little room around this little tiny table with her few things around her, she says. And she says, so stationed, I could catch the mint that never ceased to fall, and just my basket, maybe here symbolically of what her poet's receptivity, we might say. And then she'll pause and say, let me think, dash. I'm sure that was all, dash. This let me think, by the way, well, if you remember your echoes, it's from poem 247 where she used this let me think. And then this I'm sure, she's trying to think, was that all there was to it? Was that? Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it. Again, we call our series Chats with Emily because her poetry sometimes elicits this type of, I think that was all. This conversational tone. Can we write it down that way? A conversational tone in her poetry, right? She says, I'm sure that was all. Now, again, when we get to poem 772, we've quoted this line so many times because it's pure Emily. All is the price of all. What a great line. My athletes all love that line because, of course, it makes some sense in their training. All is the price of all. This was all. That this was all, she says. And then she'll say in the third stanza, what again, many scholars will say, I'm not sure this is totally true about Emily Dickinson. Literally, she says, I never spoke. Now, it is true that if you see this as a poem about writing poetry and publishing, it is true that she didn't publish, and therefore I never spoke. I never spoke, dash, by the way, notice this is almost that what one scholar has called the monastic childhood, almost like a monk or a nun. I never spoke unless addressed. And then 'twas brief and low. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information about Emily's voice and the quality of her voice. Here she says that when she did talk, it was very brief and it was very low. Maybe low as in the voice, or maybe as in low as in, I'm not going to say anything extravagant. Some have commented that she's really commenting on her poetry, which hello is clearly brief. Notice how many of these poems are very short. And low here could mean maybe you look at her poetry and you go, really? How hard can it be? It's 7 lines or 4 lines. How hard can it be? And yet As we've commented many times, we can spend a lot of time with the few number of lines that she's produced. She said, I could not bear to live aloud. Now, again, this is interesting because what is she talking about? Is she talking about literally living in her house, or is she talking about her life as a published author, or a non-published author, we might say, right? She shared her stuff but never published her stuff. Then she'll say it, the racket shamed me so. Now, the word shamed will take us back to poem 444. The use of the word racket is this is the only time that she uses this in all of her poetry. And I think it's significant that now we can turn to poem 709, which she says this: publication is the auction of the mind of man, poverty by justifying for so foul a thing. If she's talking about the racket, maybe this is it. Possibly, but we would rather from our garret go white under the white Creator than invest our snow. Thought belonged to him who gave it then to him who bare its corporal illustration. Sell the royal heir. She's not happy about the idea of publishing her stuff. In the parcel, be the merchant of the heavenly grace, but reduce no human spirit to disgrace of price. Many have joined this idea of disgrace of price with the word meant and said, Emily is arguing she never wanted to publish in her lifetime because it was a racket and she wasn't interested in it. The other female poets of her day and writers of her day, she says it was a racket. Or she's using the word racket as in noise around the house. Again, how you read this, I'll leave it to you to decide. We have then 5 of these ands that we've been studying. And if it had not been so far, and anyone I knew were going, I had often thought how noteless I should die. Now, this notion of noteless takes us back to 278 and 282, and as well the light figure of 146. This idea of being noteless. The idea of I could die, by the way, will take us to poem 570. You might want to write that down. See, all of the times she uses this phrase, I could die, when we get there. Now, of course, this one reminds us of 298, so let's enjoy that one again. Alone I cannot be, for hosts do visit me, recordless company who baffle key. They have no robes, nor names, no almanacs, nor climes, but general homes like gnomes. Their coming may be known by couriers within, their going is not, for they're never gone. Here some have argued, as we did in our conversation of this poem, that she's talking about the muses, right, that give her the information. When we get to poem 613, we will we'll pay attention to this poem when we get there. They shut me up in prose, as when a little girl. They put me in the closet because they liked me still. Some have called this the Harry Potter line of Emily Dickinson. Of course, Harry Potter living under the stairs in a small, locked away closet. Still, she says, could themselves have peeped and seen my brain go round? They might as wise have lodged a bird for treason in the pound. Himself was but too well and easy as a star, abolish his captivity and laugh. No more have I. In other words, yeah, they tried to shut me up, but they couldn't do it because I was a poet. Now, I think the way we'll read this poem will have a lot to do with how you interpret whether she's talking about literally what it was like to grow up in her house. Okay. Racket comes to mind. Or is she talking about her life as a poet and the dynamic tension of publish, not publish, to publish or not to publish? I think, though, the message here at 2A is simply it's hard. It's hard to be a dedicated artist, no question, however you read this. At 2B, well, of course, the true biography here is the question. Is this really how Emily saw her life, or is this how she saw her publishing life, right? And then, of course, the symbolism is, I think, important. At 3A, I would mention, as I already did, Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net as well, from 1929. Now, there's been a lot of debate whether it's possible that Virginia Woolf knew anything about Emily Dickinson. We believe probably not, which is sad, because it would be very interesting to know what the person who wrote Room of One's Own has to say about a poem like this. The goal to find as an artist, especially a female artist, especially living as Emily and Virginia did, Woolf did, in a world without that proper opportunity to a female poet, to a female artist. Emily had to live within that world and die in that world, as she says. I could die. Of course, notice at the very end of this poem the suggestion that she could die and nobody would even know she was there, which again suggests maybe more of a poetic, symbolic reading of this poem than physically Emily is talking about her own life. Finally, at 3b, what was a time, if you read this poem as Emily feels unappreciated or in some way, what was a time when you felt unappreciated? And as well, what is your room of your own? What is it that you've constructed that you qualify as the things you need most? You'll remember that Thoreau said in Walden, I went to the woods because I wish to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts. You'll remember he says of life. What are those essential facts? For Emily, back to the poem one more time, she says it's her lamp, her book, her geranium, and her basket. What do you need to be able to create? Emily didn't need much. Thank you.